All right, ladies and gentlemen, after almost 10 months of testing, it is time to review my Prime RVX 34. In addition to that, I am going to tell you how you can win this bow. So stay tuned. Now, I've taken this bow on several hunts over the last 10 months, and it is also the bow that I shot my giant coastal black bear with this spring on Vancouver Island. While we're talking about hunts, I want to slip in a quick ad for Mindful Hunter Outfitting. I acquired 2 hunting territories in Canada over the last year, and I am now offering archery mule deer hunts in Alberta and any weapon spring black bear hunts in British Columbia. I would like to think I'm going to be offering something a little bit different in the guided hunting space, and I would love the opportunity to help curate and create your next Canadian hunting adventure. So if you're interested in either of those hunts, please let me know. Contact me at j@mindfulhunter.com. Before we dive into the actual review, I want to talk about how I'm approaching bow reviews. I'm going to be doing several bow reviews and several gun reviews over the kind of next 6 to 10 months as I transition into covering more weapons. Now, I've held off on this because I hesitate about reviewing things that I don't feel I have a certain level of expertise with. And when you look at some people who do bow reviews, specifically I'm thinking Podium Archer, MFJJ, and Inside Out Precision. These guys are phenomenal. I watch all their stuff. I am never going to have the level of in-depth knowledge that those two have. However, I think sometimes those guys have a tendency to talk over people's heads. I know when I first got into archery and I would watch some of those reviews, I'd be like, I don't understand half of what this guy's talking about. So I'm not looking to compete with those guys. I think if you're watching a bow review, you should probably watch a bow review from me and go watch a bow review from them on the same bow, because you're going to get 2 different takes on it. I want you to think of these weapon reviews, my gun reviews as well, as like a blue collar review. This is like the layman's approach. I'm trying to give you my subjective experience using the bow and talk about it in terms that everybody can understand, from the beginning archer all the way through to the intermediate and expert archer. Also, this will be a series, and I will be using the same categories and measurement systems moving forward. So you'll start to be able to see comparability between the bows. I shot my Hoyt RX7. I still have it in the other room. I also have a Matthews Lift 33, which I've shot for a bit. I'm tweaking a couple things on it, but I will have all the measurements from those 2 bows as well. So when I release those reviews, you'll start to be able to connect the dots between the reviews. So let's start with price. I'm going to use Lancaster Archery because it's kind of like a general agreed upon place. I'm sure you can find slightly different prices at different dealers, but it's listed at $11.99 USD. To put that in context, the Matthews Lift is $12.29, so it's only 30 more bucks. And the Hoyt Alpha X is $14.49, but Hoyts are kind of always overpriced if you want my opinion on that. As far as the specs, this bow comes in a 32 axle to axle, a 34, and a 36. The brace height on the 32 and the 34 is 6 1/4 inch. The brace height on the 36 is 6 3/4 inch. Now, the brace height is the distance from the string to the riser. The longer that distance gets, traditionally the more forgiving the bow is, or the easier it is to shoot, but also the slower the bow tends to be. All 3 options come in 40 to 80 pounds. The 32 inch comes in draw lengths from 26.5 inches to 30 inches. The 34 comes in 26.5 to 30.5, and the 36 inch axle to axle bow comes in at 27.5 inches to 31.5 inches in draw length options. The weight, the bare bow claimed on the site is 4.5 pounds. When I weighed it, it was 4.7. Maybe they take off vibration dampeners or something. Those games always piss me off. I think when I take it out of the box, it should weigh what you say it weighs on the website. I know it's only 2 pounds, but these are all machined components with known weights. There's no reason to have a discrepancy there. While we're on the topic of discrepancy, the claimed speed of this bow is 342 feet per second. Now, the way they get those IBO speeds is with a 30-inch draw length and a 350 grain arrow. Now, I did not have a 350 grain arrow, so I went and I'd already seen Podium Archer's review on this one, so all credit goes to him for this measurement, but he averaged at 319 feet per second, so that is a 23 foot per second variation from the stated speed. That is a pretty heavy mark against this bow. There is no rational explanation for why this bow should be shooting 23 feet slower than the claimed speed. Now, I shot with a 485 grain arrow, and I got 275 feet per second. My draw length is 30 inches naturally, so I kind of fall into that IBO category. And then I also shot a 545 grain arrow. That came out at 260 feet per second. I compared my Hoyt and my lift, and those two bows with the same draw length and the same arrows shot between 6 and 8 feet faster with the similar weighted arrows. So that gives you some, point of comparison. It is not an incredibly fast bow, but we're going to get into that more in a minute. Now, the cams are the inline core cams. This is kind of like an updated version that they've been going with for the last couple years. Now, it is an inline system with inward cable movement that is trying to eliminate cam lean. So basically, when the cams start, the string is to the side of the cam, but then as the cam rotates, the string is moved in line with the cam. So that reduces cam lean and makes the bow, how do I say this? I don't want to say it makes it more tunable. It makes it more naturally tuned. Like when you start introducing cam lean, that's when you have, you can adjust cam lean to get the bow in tune, but you're normally having to do that because it's the cam lean itself that's causing it to be out of tune. So you're basically getting the cam lean to the ideal, amount where it's in tune. And if the string is in line with the cam, you don't even have to mess with that. So the more in line the string can be, the less you need to tune your bow. I hope that makes sense. Now, the riser on this version is 34% stiffer than last year's RVX. Still uses 8000 series aluminum. Rest and sight mounts, there is a Picatinny attachment for the sight, same thing that Hoyt uses, and it's got the QAD integrated dovetail for the rest. I really wish it would, manufacturers would come to some agreement here on rests. I prefer the Hamskea rest, and I know that there are kind of integrated Hamskea rests with some of the bows, but it seems like such an easy thing for the bow manufacturers to come in agreement upon, but you still need to use the universal adapter with the Hamskea rest on this bow, which is not a big deal, but it is just kind of like one more piece on there that you wouldn't need if it had a but if it had an adapter that natively matched up with the Hamskea. So this bow does come with a proprietary quiver mount that you can use the Prime quiver and keep it more in line. I'm still sticking with the tight spot because I switch back and forth between bows all the time. I actually did that with my Hoyt and kind of found it to be a pain in the ass because if when you sell your bow, you move to a new bow, you got to rebuy all your components. It's another one of the challenging elements with all these individual companies using different mounts for the sights. Like, now that I have this Picatinny mounted black gold, I go to get a Matthews lift, I can't mount this sight on that bow. Having the proprietary sight, quiver, and rest mounts does make certain products match more effectively to the bow. However, it's a pretty big pain in the ass when you go to switch bows if you're switching bow manufacturers, because none of your stuff links up. So I'm actually still sticking with mostly universal components, because that way for testing, when I swap back and forth, I can just use all my same accessories on the other bows. Now, stabilizer, front and back, but it lacks a side mounting position. I'll be honest, we're going to get into this deeper. This is a center grip bow. It's incredibly stable. I personally had no need for a back or a sidebar on this. I'm using a 12-inch stabilizer beast or a Spider out front, and that was all I needed to keep this, very stable in hand. Vibration dampeners, nothing special. Couple up here at the limb pockets, a couple extra between the limbs themselves. Now, strings, very interesting, free for life to the original owner. So as long as you register this bow after you buy it, every 2 years you can go in to a dealer and they will replace the strings free for you, no charge. I would say that based on my experience with strings, these are like average to slightly above average manufacturer quality. When I do custom strings, I tend to use Gas Ghost, and I think they're XV or something. In my opinion, they're kind of the highest quality strings I've ever used. I tried ABB and they fell apart on me. These strings are not as nice as those strings, and there's still a little bit of stretch. And one of the reasons I know there's some stretch is having to realign my peep sight over the first few weeks, because the more I shot the bow, the more that peep would kind of twist on me, which is evidence that the string is kind of like shifting a little bit on you. But I would say for, all intents and purposes, strings are of good enough quality. They're satisfactory. And the fact that you can get a free pair every 2 years is like a pretty big deal. Costs like $150 US for a new set of strings. So unfortunate that those don't transfer ownership. Only good for the original owner. Now, grip material. So it's this kind of hard rubberized material that they call nano grip. And what do they say about nano grip? Offers a warm to the touch grip for the ultimate in comfort and consistency. The nano grip is made with aerogel technology, which was created by NASA to protect astronauts from extreme temperatures. The longer you hold the grip, the warmer it gets. I don't know. It's all right, I guess. I think that's they're going a little bit overboard on all that. The grip is decent, but I wouldn't, I don't know about how space age it all is. It's still, I've been on some cold hunts and when you pick up your bow, it's cold. Like it's not magic. Build quality. It's very solid. But here's the thing. When you're dealing with these premium bows, they're all pretty solid. In the last year, I've shot Hoyt, Matthews, and Prime. I haven't taken my Matthews on any hunts, but I've taken my Hoyt on a bunch. Now, I did have the issue with the element kind of coming off the carbon riser, but I never had any issues other than that with that bow, and I think that was just a manufacturer defect with the epoxy. I took this on probably 4 or 5 hunts, very aggressive with it, not gentle with my bows at all, never had any issues. Nothing ever came apart. Nothing ever needed to be readjusted. There's some cosmetic kind of scratches, but overall build quality, very high. Tolerances seem very tight. Now, before we get into my personal setup and the more subjective elements of the review, why don't I tell you how you can win this bow? Super simple. I created an online community for gear reviews called Mindful Reviews. It's a place where like-minded people can get together, talk about gear, talk about hunting in a supporting and encouraging format. We're almost up at 400 members now. The forums are a fantastic spot to get advice, talk about hunt plans, bounce ideas off of people. Like I mentioned, very supportive, very encouraging. Develop this community from the ground up. And all you have to do to enter to win this bow is join Mindful Reviews. The draw is open until December 15th, and anyone who joins between now and December 15th will be automatically entered to win this bow. You just need to be an active member on December 15th, and you will have a chance to win this bow. I feel very strongly that if you stick around in the community for a couple months and engage with other people on the forums, you're going to see the inherent value. I post a lot in there about potential gear reviews. You can request gear for reviews. We have group Zoom calls once a month where you can get your gear lists critiqued by me. You got full access to me for any gear related questions. I highly recommend it. So mindful-reviews.com. Join before December 15th and you will be entered to win this bow. All right, my setup, 70-pound draw weight, 30-inch draw. The arrow I'm shooting is 485 grains. When I got this bow with the limb bolts cranked all the way down, it was drawing at 69 pounds. So I had to add a couple of twists to the cables to get it up to 70. Now, twisting your cables will increase your draw weight, but it will also increase the length and therefore draw length of your string. So twist the cables, lengthens the strings. Other way around, twisting the string lengthens the cables. Now, everything that I've talked about so far were kind of the objective elements of this bow. Now I want to transition into the subjective elements, or more my experience with this bow. So let's talk about tunability, because that's kind of the first interaction you have with the bow. You build it, and that's the other thing. I built this bow. I set it up all myself, just in the other room here. And I've done that with a few bows this year, so it's really given me an insight into the differences between setting up different bows. Tunability. So there are quick tune spacers on the limbs that you can adjust without removing the axle. And if anybody's done the whole like top hat shift thing with the Matthews bows, getting the axle out, it's kind of like a bit of a process. It's not like it's that bad, but it is a bit of a pain. That being said, it's great to have a way to adjust cam positioning to tune your bow without having to remove the axle. However, I didn't even have to do that. I have set this bow up from scratch twice. I had to use the components, the accessories on another bow, so and then ended up moving my D-loop and doing a bunch of stuff. So I've kind of built this bow twice. Both times I built this bow, I had it shooting a bullet hole inside of 3 arrows. Now I had a completely different experience with my Matthews lift, which I'll get into on that review. So while it's nice that they have the spacers, I didn't even have to touch the spacers. I basically shot 2 arrows, made micro adjustments to my rest, nothing even that big, like a couple of 16ths one way or another with elevation and windage. And by the 3rd arrow, both times I was shooting perfect bullet holes. I think I might have set it up 1/8 of an inch knock high to begin with. That seems to be working out well for me with most bow setups. The one thing I will note that we'll get into more, because this is a center grip riser, so that is a very big difference from most of the bows that are available now. And you have an equivalent amount of string above and below your knock point. I think that's what contributes to this being such an easy bow to tune. Also, the fact that it's not shooting as fast as some other bows, and the fact that it has a forgiving brace height, I'm sure also contribute to that fact. Now, draw cycle. Smoothest drawing bow I've ever shot. Unbelievably smooth. And it doesn't fall over into the back wall. Some of the bows I'm shooting lately, the first 80% of the draw cycle is like smooth, and then the pressure builds, and then you kind of drop off into the back wall. And the reason I find that frustrating is that when you get that fall over and dump, when you hit that back wall with force, it kind of like shakes your whole setup and you got to wait for things to settle down again. The beautiful thing about the Prime is that it's like smooth from beginning to end. So it's almost like you gradually hit the back wall. Now it's still firm, it's not a squishy back wall, but you don't dump into it, creating this like jarring that you have to settle into. You kind of fall into it nicely. Also, typically, smooth draw cycle means less aggressive cams, means slower speed. So you are paying a price for that smooth draw cycle. Hand feel. I would say there's a small amount of vibration, and it's not like it smacks into your hand. It's like it just, you feel it a little bit after the shot. But I would say of the 3 bows I'm shooting right now, the Hoyt, the Matthews, and the Prime has the lowest amount of felt vibration in those 3 bows. Stability. Again, I'm going to attribute a lot of this stability to the center grip riser. It's an extremely stable bow. I think that's one of the reasons you can get away with kind of minimal stabilization, is that the physics of the bow itself naturally make it want to be balanced. I don't find it corking to one side or another. And it naturally is a very stable bow. Noise. So I have a decibel meter that I used to test this bow. I tested it inside in this room with the microphone of the decibel meter about 16 inches away from where the bow was being shot. Like I was sitting in a chair at a table right here, microphone for the decibel meter 16 inches away. Now I shot the bow 3 times. I got a 69 decibel reading, 75 decibel reading, and a 79 decibel reading. So we're going to average those out at 74, 75 decibels. Now I don't have a whole lot to go over that, because where you measure from is really going to indicate like the max decibel reading. If you measure 6 inches closer, you're going to get a higher reading. So it's not like I can look up online and see what other people are getting, and I don't even know what kind of equipment they're using. So it's more of an internally comparable variable as opposed to an externally comparable variable. But as this series of gear reviews continues, I will have an ability to tell you quantifiably that one bow is louder or quieter than another bow. Another factor to keep in mind is that the heavier your arrow is, the quieter your bow is. And that's because your bow is using more of the force created from the strings and the riser and the cams to push that heavier arrow forward. So when the limbs go back to full extension and the string slams into the stop, it has burned off more of the kinetic energy contained within the bow into the arrow, so there's less left to transition into heat, noise, and everything else. So again, my native arrow, the one I shoot with right now the most, is 485 grains. So that was a 75 average decibel reading with a 485 grain arrow with the microphone placed 16 inches away from the bow. So as I do more of these reviews and build on that, we should see more comparability between those numbers. Now let's talk about the grip. There's an issue with the grip for me. Now, if I hold the grip right at the top, this portion of the riser kind of contacts this bone in my thumb right here. Now, the nice thing about it is, if I'm choked right up and I kind of have a twist in my hand so that the meat of my thumb is against the handle right here, and I push, it keeps the bow very stable horizontally, but it very definitely presses down on the top of my thumb. And I'm going to say it's painful, but it's not like a 9 out of 10, like, oh my God, I feel like my thumb's going to break. But it is uncomfortable. And then if I try and move my hand down the grip in order to avoid that contact, I tend to get more sway with the bow and I don't feel nearly as stable. So as I shot this bow, I just got used to it that I choke right up. I keep that bone nice and tight. I keep a nice twist to my palm. And listen, it's not a deal breaker, but it's a little bit annoying. So I would deduct a point there for me personally. And that just could be the ergonomics and the way it fits with my hand. Maybe other people haven't had that problem. I don't know. Let's talk about accuracy. And then that's going to lead me into one more element, which will lead me into my final conclusions. I would say this bow is very easy to get a decent or slightly above average grouping out of. However, my Matthews, which is, I would argue, a little bit harder to shoot, I think it's a bit more aggressive. When I'm on, I shoot tighter groups with the Matthews than I do with the Prime. However, when I'm off with the Matthews, my groups are bigger than when I'm off with the Prime. Let me explain that one more time. There is less of a discrepancy between being off and being on with the Prime groups than there is with the Matthews. And I think that would translate more to newer archers. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But that being said, it is still a very accurate bow. Like the arrows go where you want them to. I didn't have any major issues, like I said, tuning or sighting in the bow. No problems there. And the last factor I want to talk about, the last variable I want to talk about is like an X factor. And this is just how the bow makes me feel, or how I feel about the bow. Here's the thing. It's not super exciting, but it's really reliable. It's almost like, when I grew up, there was these things called K cars, and every kind of brand had them, and they were like the stable, reliable cars, but they weren't flashy. They were kind of cheap, so it's not a perfect analogy. But I want to say this bow is like the workhorse. Like it does what it says on the tin, but it doesn't do it in a particularly exciting way. And maybe that's because it's a very forgiving bow. I wanted to use an analogy from bodybuilding because the Olympia was just last weekend, and it's kind of something else I'm passionate about. You will have some bodybuilders that lay people think are like the best thing ever. Like there's a guy right now, Andrew Jacked. He's huge. He has these flashy body parts, but he lacks in symmetry. He doesn't really have, his back needs work. He has some elements of conditioning that are off, but because he has these wow body parts, when you look at him, it's very impressive. But then there's other people, Hunter Labrada is a good example of this. He's incredibly well balanced, symmetrical top to bottom, left to right, very dense, very good conditioning. But because everything is in balance with everything else, nothing stands out to you. And I feel like that's kind of what's going on with this bow. Because there's no, like when you look at a Matthews, it has this super narrow profile. It has the very straight riser. Like you can see a Matthews from a mile away. When you look at Hoyt, with my Ultra, it's got this crazy curved riser with these really smooth lines and curves. It's beautiful. It's sexy. You can see a Hoyt a mile away. When you go look at a Prime, you're like, nothing really stands out to you about it. Now, for super logical people, or for like most people who are interested in performance, that shouldn't matter. You know what this is? This is like the Tikka of bows, because Tikkas aren't super exciting either, but man, for the money, they're really hard to beat. And that's kind of how I feel about this bow. So thinking about that, let's move into my final conclusions and what I would say about this bow and how I would score or rank this bow. Again, not super exciting, but very reliable. It's a very forgiving bow. I think this bow would be ideal for like the beginner to the highly intermediate shooter. I don't know how many expert shooters are going to get what they want out of this bow. I don't even mean it like that. I just mean you might find another bow a little bit more rewarding. I didn't get the same sense, when I shot my Matthews Lift, it was a bit more of an exciting bow. I felt like it matched up with me a little bit more. This is another note I want to make right now about bows. I made a similar note about boots a while ago. No matter how much detail I give you in this video, and no matter how objective I try to be, there is no replacement for going into your bow shop and shooting multiple bows, because you could have the complete opposite reaction that I had. You might shoot a Matthews and be like, it does what it says, but it's not really that exciting to me, and then shoot the Prime and it blow your socks off. I'm just trying to convey my own personal experience. I think anybody would do well with this bow. The point I'm trying to make is that if you are a newer shooter, you might find a bow like this easier to shoot than a Matthews or a Hoyt because of the center grip riser, because of the forgiving brace height, and just the general cam design. The fact that it's a slower shooting bow means it's a little bit easier to tune and a little bit more forgiving and reliable with group sizings. So it's gonna not cover up, but it's gonna account for some of your shortcomings as an archer. And I think that's a very strong point if you find yourself in that category. So anyways, that's the Prime RVX 34. Would love some feedback on this review. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. I'm gonna do the Matthews Lift 33 next. Probably will still be another couple months. I decided to rebuild that bow a little bit. I wanna jack it up to 75 pounds. I gotta go pick up a couple more components and I wanna shoot. The idea with these reviews, I think what MFJJ and Inside Out do are phenomenal, but when they do their bow reviews, they're literally unboxing a bow, shooting 12 arrows out of it in a shop, and then giving you their thoughts. For the most part, that's how they do their gear reviews. I want to do something a little more in depth where I've lived with the bow for several months, hunted with the bow, hopefully killed with the bow, and then give you a more meaningful kind of personal subjective experience with the bow. So it'll be a few months before the Matthews Lift one is out. But give me feedback. If there's anything different you want to see in that review, I'm more than happy to try and oblige. Reminder, if you want to win this bow, all you need to do is join mindful-reviews.com before December 15th, 2024. Also, if you're interested in hunting archery mule deer in Alberta or any weapon, spring black bear in British Columbia, Mindful Hunter Outfitting is now open for business. Hit me up for details, jay@mindfulhunter.com. If you can engage with this material in any way, shape, or form, like, comment, share, subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in.